Hello, this is Unsung with GameLeap, and today we're going to be doing an in-depth guide for YONE. YONE is one of the strongest carries in all of League when played correctly, so we'll focus on giving you the tools to get the most out of YONE's kit. Like Yasuo, YONE's kit is pretty seamless in its usage. Each and every single one of his abilities complement each other very well. This champion is both easy to learn while also being incredibly hard to master because of this. It's quite common to overthink on YONE, so let's go ahead and demystify this hunter. If you want to learn other champions as soon as possible, head on over to GameLeap.com. I've been making champion guides for over 3 years to keep our website up to date with all the best tips, tricks, and builds, so make sure to mosey on over. I'll see you all on the website. Let's go ahead and begin this guide with YONE's Q instead of his passive. This ability is short and sweet, but its uses are vast, and they only grow with you. Instead of only thinking of this ability as an extra auto attack, let's first observe the range. As you can see, the 450 range on this is significantly larger than our 175 auto attack range. This by extension makes it longer than most top laner and some mid laners auto range as well. Get used to putting melees on a pseudo range tether using this skill. I would highly recommend that you check out how Zookill spaces enemies utilizing both YONE's E and Q in conjunction. It is a thing of beauty when mastered, and nobody does it better than Zookill. This concept is our first topic of this guide. YONE's Q is not only an auto attack, but also a ranged extension on each Q, but especially the third one. This is doubly true when we utilize YONE's Q flash mechanic. Spacing opponents and poking them out in the early game is our utmost priority, aside from level 1. YONE has a monstrous level 1 due to the base damage on Mortal Steel and its synergy with lethal tempo. For this reason, there are a few champions in the game that can fight YONE if they face check him or dare to enter his range at all. If someone walks into us while inside of a bush, start the fight with an auto into Q immediately so we can get some cooldown reduction from lethal on our Q to begin with. After this, we auto as much as possible while walking alongside our opponent and throwing Qs. Most champions die by the time that your third Q is ready to cast. Just make sure that we don't extend these fights into large minion waves or take them into champions like Darius, Olaf, or Set unless you're ready to make an outplay happen. Outside of level 1, YONE honestly kinda sucks. Most champions have better short trades and stronger stats for extended fights, so we really have to make use of YONE's massive effective range from Q3 and his W. Your general power spikes on this champion are as follows. Level 6, boots completed, first attack speed item. Post boots, YONE is a menace who should be feared. Pre boots and post level 1, not so much. Now that we talked about YONE's Q and early game game plan surrounding it, let's talk about the W. YONE's W is a % damage dealing shield. The shield is deceptively strong, and we can use it through CC with the correct timing. This is another core mechanic for playing YONE, especially if we're at the weaker period in our lane. Toss your W out to intercept crowd control to mitigate damage in bad trades. This is best used if we mess up our spacing or simply just want to eat a spell. The damage on this skill is secondary to the shield until we hit our boots plus completed item spike. W when paired with D shield and second wind is more than enough to help us through any roughed range lanes. W with bone plating will prevent even the burstiest of Rivens from one-tapping us at level 3 as well. Next up, YONE's E is a pretty complex ability to say the least. The uses of this ability are as numerous as you are creative. We can E over a wall, stack our Q3, E back, and then Q3 over. We can use this in conjunction with our Q3 to catch somebody for a trade. We can E ulti into Q3 to lock somebody down. We can also E as the CC is about to hit us to cleanse it completely, negating champions like Zoe from ever being able to do anything meaningful to us. These are just a few examples. What defines a YONE player more than anything is how they use their E. Two people at the exact same rank can have wildly different playstyles due to this skill. At this point, I think it's safe to say that everyone who's played League since YONE's release has been run down by some drooling, mechanicless heathen who simply clicks this key and then right-clicks directly on top of you. Sometimes this is the best play, but it definitely isn't the only play. So make sure to experiment and find your own playstyle. YONE's R is simple but effective. We have essentially an Orianna ultimate, but in a line instead. This is great for people pulling in for a wombo combo or simply closing the gap on a squishy AD carry. Few champions will survive a direct hit from YONE's R, and the crowd control that's tied to it is very powerful in any and all kinds of skirmishes. However, do note that YONE is incredibly weak before he completes his boots, so we generally want to stay away from skirmishes unless we are at an advantage. Now that we've explained our abilities and covered some of the early game, let's talk about laning phase in general. Laning with YONE varies from matchup to matchup. He is a worse early game against ranged champions, but scales way better against them simply due to the amount of damage he's able to output on 2 items. A Q3 or an ulti hit is usually an instant death sentence for most ranged champions. Melees, on the other hand, get easily oppressed by YONE's strong level 1 and then have a fighting chance at stopping him later on in the game. These are going to be the most volatile matchups for YONE since they snowball so hard in either direction. YONE, unlike Yasuo, is far better suited for top lane due to his item reliance and the safety that he receives from being in a longer lane. For these reasons, we want to freeze against most melee champions and then passively poke / last hit, utilizing our Q's extended range. If they make a mistake or over-aggress, we can click on our E and focus on surviving the trade or punishing their mistake. YONE is all about his spacing. This is the most important mechanic of him. We don't want to bait ourselves into auto-attacking attacking an opponent who's going to burst us down, so we need to use our E's bonus movement speed to kite basically everybody. We're essentially playing a ranged champion. Against ranged champions, we want to shove the wave ideally. This will give YONE some semblance of priority and accelerate his boot spike if we're ever able to respond to a skirmish first or lane lock our opponent. Shoving against high wave clear can be problematic in certain matchups, so for lanes such as Victor, Ahri, and Vex, we can go Doran's second wind and last hit as needed. Once we get our boots, we can begin to aggress again and allow that scaling pressure to build more and more and more. Make sure that we utilize our W to equalize bad trades and use our E Q3 combo to deal damage from range safely in short burst trades. After boots, however, YONE's playstyle completely changes. We go from hunted to hunter. Measured aggression is the way to go with this champion. We want to try and overwhelm our opponents with frequent bursty trades using our E's. As discussed earlier, the easiest way is to simply E and then Q3 off of a frozen wave to begin a fight, but in my opinion, YONE is significantly stronger on Q2 instead of Q3. Q3 puts us on a time limit, whereas engaging on an enemy with E into Q2 sets them up to fail immediately after. If the Q2 lands, our opponent will be forced to walk away, or else they'll eat the full ramp of lethal tempo after the inevitable Q3 lands. If we engage with Q3 and it whiffs, the trade is over. These kinds of drawn-out fights are where YONE really shines due to how explosive and consistent his damage is overall. YONE has huge crits and lethal tempo to rely on. If we land a trade with E beforehand, we can easily turn this into a kill on our next E rotation by lining up a Q3 into ulti combo. It's important to note that at max range, Q3 makes YONE's ultimate completely undodgeable, whereas melee Q3 allows for a small gap to appear in which our opponent can flash out. Do not forget that we can stack our Q on things like Scuttle Crab, Raptors, Drake from out of vision before we engage. Also, in the early game, we generally want to rely on our jungler. Because YONE has such a weak lane pre-boots post level 1, the jungler is generally going to decide our tempo. We always want to make sure that we're warding our own lane at around 3 minutes on one side and then playing towards that side of the lane to ensure that we don't get set behind by the enemy jungler. YONE, if he's not killed in the early game, is an absolute menace. However, if he is killed, he is very useless until he gets some items under his belt. For these reasons, we always want to ward defensively and then play around that ward as best we can. Then we can use that aggression to create a bigger and bigger lead. Make sure that we're also checking our minimap every 5 or so seconds to get an idea of where the enemy jungler is at. If we can track the enemy jungler effectively, then we don't have to worry about getting blown up by some random happenstance. Now that we covered the early game, let's go ahead and talk about the mid to late game. Once YONE hits 2 items, his playstyle is going to shift again. We can do the top lane Kraken into Hullbreaker build, which focuses on split pushing and creating duels, or go the Kraken into Infinity Edge route and play as a pseudo assassin. Let's cover split pushing first as it's more complex. YONE ideally doesn't actually want to hit towers until we land a big trade on our opponent. Most champions cannot duel YONE in a side lane after the completion of boots plus Kraken, so they'll opt into wave clearing against him. We want to prep our Q3 on the wave against these champions and then take aggressive E trades underneath their turret until we deplete their HP bar to the point where they have to try to outplay a dive or straight up recall. The way that we do this is by utilizing our W. We go in, we wait to auto attack them, the tower ramps to its third shot, then we W and then blink out, or we can use our W to simply block the champion damage. On recall is where we want to actually hit the turret instead of looking to bleed our opponent out. It's very important to have teleport for objectives like Baron or Drake when we adopt this playstyle, and exert all of our pressure that we can on the map to secure these objectives. This means that we want to draw the jungler's attention in the mid to late game. When they're on our side of the map, they can't be doing the Drake and Baron. We can transition into a more teamfight oriented role after we complete our item after Hullbreaker. But split push YONE really shines against pretty much all compositions. It will take at least 2 people to stop you minimum, so sit in a side lane as often as you can and force these 1v2s, but make sure that we do it in an intelligent way. If the enemy team has very CC heavy champions, then bait a CC, or force them to chase you. If the enemy team is weak against you, then we can play a little bit more loosely and dive them over and over and over again. Assassin mid YONE, however, has a different mindset. Instead of slowly whittling opponents down in a side lane, we want to focus on landing fat ultis as frequently as possible in skirmishes. Target priority for damage YONE goes ADC, mid, jungle, support, top in most compositions. Identify the largest threat and then send them to the spirit realm. This means that we sit in fog of war, bushes, and near objectives to await these opportunities. We generally want to play with our team as mid YONE. Remember to be at dragons a full 30 seconds before it spawns, assist your jungler with each and every Rift Herald, and to zone using your E from Baron Pit or Drake Pit when the time arises. We generally only want to group for objectives when our ultimate is available on mid YONE, because we're so much more reliant on it. We do not have the durability of a top YONE to fall back on. Don't be afraid of engaging with just your E as well, since we will be putting our opponent on a time limit. Either they blow a summoner or they die. Your role here is most similar to a diver, something like Riven or Irelia, but you lack the stats to effectively tank, so damage is our only answer. If the enemy team is no longer alive, you won't have to worry about getting blown up. It's really quite simple. These are our 2 general playstyles. Now that we covered these, let's go ahead and go over a generic build for both mid and top. Itemization is quite easy here. We always, and I mean always, rush Berserker Greaves on Yone. This is our largest spike by far. Kraken against squishies, and then Blade the Rune King against tanks as a first item. This varies between mid or top, but we're generally going to be going Kraken about 90% of the time. Second item depends on role. We go Hullbreaker for top lane and IE for mid lane. Third item will be IE for top lane and BT for mid lane. Death Stance or Sterix are both solid for the fourth item slot, and GA is a must for our last item. For runes, we want to go Precision Primary for lethal tempo. This augments our Q and W's cooldown while also extending our auto attack range, making it best in slot. Next up, Triumph, Legend Alacrity, and then Last Stand. We always want Resolve Secondary with either Bone Plating or Second Wind based on our matchup, and then Overgrowth or Unflinching depending on the enemy team. Bone Plating into Burst, Second Wind into Ranged, Unflinching into CC, Overgrowth into carries. Once again, make sure that you check out GameLeap.com for all the best champion tips and tricks brought to you by yours truly. I have hundreds of courses up on the site. Make sure that you check them out if you want free LP. Anyways, this was Unsung with GameLeap. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next one.